Hello everyone, what is up? It is me, Ewan. This is What Culture. This is Josh Brown, and we're here today to talk to you about Guillermo Del Toro's Frankenstein, because yesterday the news dropped that the movie is clocking in at a balmy 2.5 hours. And Josh, I got really excited about this because, GDT, a lot of his movies have been met with unfortunate fates over the last kind of decade. Not the ones that have come out, they've all been really, really good. But obviously has a habit of getting into projects and then them kind of falling apart, like The Mountains of Madness. We got that really cool little clip of it the other year, the little kind of CG test footage, which looked amazing. But the good thing is that Frankenstein is being made. But then I had the reality came crashing down around me.
The streaming come down, some might describe it as.
Because, for as much as Netflix has dabbled in theaters over the last, 6 or so years, they have confirmed that Frankenstein will not be getting a wide theatrical release. It'll be dropping on Netflix in November. And obviously there is still potential for a limited theatrical run. They did that with The Irishman, I think, for a week or something like that.
Yeah.
Richard Linklater's Hitman got a very tiny theatrical window last year, as did David Fincher's The Killer in 2023. But it's not going to be seen in front of a wide audience, and that, to me, Josh, is very, very depressing, because we're kind of in this weird cycle with Netflix where they're happy to fund these brilliant auteurs, but at the same time, just shunt their stuff into the content trough, along with stuff like, I don't know, The Grey Man.
It's a real shame, right? Because, like you said, they are some of the only people in town funding stuff like auteur-driven blockbusters like Frankenstein, like The Irishman a couple of years ago, that you mentioned there. But the issue is, it feels like behind the scenes there is a sort of war going on between the people who are creating these movies for Netflix and Netflix themselves, and what they want their business model to be going forward. And we've heard so many stories over the years about directors fighting for their movies to get a theatrical release of any kind, whether that's limited, whether that's a week, whether it's one day.
Forgot about Rian Johnson and Knives Out.
That's
obviously
exactly.
that was literally a week over Christmas or something in 2020. And then we have I know him and Daniel Craig have come out and have basically been like, you better put this in theaters, Netflix, and Netflix is like, I don't know about that.
Precisely, that was the report I was going to refer to there. Apparently those two warring behind the scenes to try and get the latest Knives Out mystery in theaters, because they've signed that $100 million plus deal with Netflix for a bunch of Knives Out movies, and have then had to scrap to get them in theaters in any form. The fact that this won't maybe be getting even a limited theatrical release, I think, is just very indicative of where streaming is going. They not only want to have their biggest movies and their biggest content, as it were, on their platform, but also I see a lot of other streamers, not necessarily Netflix, they're sometimes okay with this, but also moving away from physical media entirely. And
Apple and Killers of the Flower Moon.
Dude, literally,
Where's that 4K?
The weekend, I came out of the second screening of Superman and thought, you know what, I'm going to treat myself to the 4K Killers of the Flower Moon Blu-ray.
I see the link between Superman and Killers of the Flower Moon. Exactly. I see it.
Exactly. I want another huge epic, just to chase down Superman.
I feel pretty great. Time to feel terrible.
Exactly. Gotta balance it out, baby. But no, the point was, it wasn't there. Then you check online, you're like, oh, this is trapped
Never
on
happened.
Apple.
They made it up.
They made it up. And it sucks because you're grateful the fact that Apple financed that movie and got it out at all and gave it a limited theatrical release, but then you're also frustrated that it's like, oh, that's the only way to experience it now going forward.
Yeah, exactly. And also with it being on streaming, there's all sorts of compression issues, and it's obviously a library that, is kind of semi-permeable. You don't know how long it's going to be there for. I'm doing a big video on streaming and physical media, which will be coming out very, very soon, which is exciting. But yeah, I kind of wanted to contextualize this whole Frankenstein hoo-ha, this monster mash, if you will, within Netflix's kind of long-term strategy, which they have been very transparent about, like a supervillain just kind of broadcasting their intentions to the globe, just kind of being like, yeah, we're doing this. So I wanted to point out an interview that Ted Sarandos, that is the CEO of Netflix, had with Time magazine earlier in 2025. This was back when, it's kind of funny how much the box office fortunes have changed within such a short space of time. I feel there's a lot of doom and gloom that was prophesied at the beginning of the year that has kind of, begun to shift. But in response to that kind of flagging box office, Sarandos said that, what does that say? What is the consumer trying to tell us? That they'd like to watch movies at home, thank you. The studios and the theaters are duking it out, trying to preserve this 45-day window that is completely out of step with the consumer experience of just loving a movie. But it gets worse. Folks grew up thinking, I want to make movies on a gigantic screen and have strangers watch the play in the theater for 2 months and people cry and sold out shows. It's an outdated concept. Sarandos also said that making movies for the theater for a communal experience is an outmoded idea, arguing that for most people, not for everybody, if you're fortunate enough to live in Manhattan and you can walk to a multiplex and see a movie, that's fantastic. Most of the country cannot. So, we've gotten this all wrong. Netflix is just standing up for the little guy.
Of course they are.
They're just standing up for the little guy. They're standing up for like you and me. And they just want us to have. They just love movies so much that they want to kill cinemas. They want to get the.
I love it when companies across the board, whether they're working in media or otherwise, like, are so dedicated to a narrative, like, have come up with this idea that, yes, this is great, not only because it's going to be best for business, but we're actually saving cinema when you think about it. I find it absolutely ridiculous, Ewan. There's lots that was mentioned there.
You know, the big elite. The elite.
Exactly,
you know,
right.
the cinema. Like, again, there are actual genuine concerns with how expensive it is to go to the cinema and stuff, but the idea here that it's like, oh, those martini drinkers in Manhattan, you know, they can go to the cinema, but Johnny Q on the street, he's just gonna go and sit home and fork out 20 quid a month.
Exactly,
for
that's
Netflix's premium subscription.
I'm gonna say, Netflix themselves haven't exactly been known for being pro-consumer in that way, constantly raising prices, removing features that were appreciated, like sharing accounts.
Censorship as well,
and then of course there's the idea that they can just remove content at any time, and then you do not have access to that, and there's no physical release, and it might as well have not existed. So I find that quite facetious. Thank you.
Love that.
I find that argument quite facetious overall, and I just feel like you can see through it. Like you said, there are concerns about cinema going, whether that's audience etiquette, whether that's the prices of tickets themselves, which have increased massively, and priced people out of the experience overall and made it kind of just not at all something you kind of want to go and do. Like, I have definitely found myself going to the cinema less, but on the other hand, I know I keep mentioning it, going to see Killers of the Flower Moon when that movie came out, I could have watched it on Apple. I went to see it in IMAX, and it was one of my favourite movies.
You could have seen it on Charlie XCX's Apple, and you didn't.
Exactly.
You actually went to the cinema and saw it.
I went to the cinema and saw it, and it was amazing. The fact that got a limited theatrical release at all, I found was, if I'm going to have to compromise, a nice splitting of the difference. But to say that, in this year especially, you mentioned box office there, in a year that has seen box office hits that saw, and I'm not saying they're great movies, but the likes of Lilo and Stitch, cross $1 billion at the box office. The hunger is there, and you can see it.
The hunger is definitely there, because literally only a few months ago, Nosferatu, a gothic horror tale, you know, based on the German expressionistic film from the 1920s, which in itself was a kind of like bootleg adaptation of Bram Stoker's Dracula, that made a killing at the box office. And GDT here with Frankenstein, it's pulling from those same gothic roots. You know, Shelley's novel is foundational to that genre. It touches upon different themes, but the overall kind of visual language and tone and everything, it's very similar. You've got a fantastically popular cast led by Oscar Isaac, and Mia Goth is going to be in it. Jacob Elordi, who obviously made everyone freak out with Saltburn, which was a weirdly mainstream hit.
Yeah.
Given, you know, the subject matter and everything, or perhaps because of the subject matter, because it was like, you know, shock value or whatever. He's playing the monster. We've got Christoph Waltz in this. Ralph Ineson, after he's eaten the earth in Fantastic Four First Steps, he's also going to be in here. So this is the really frustrating kind of dichotomy that we have going on with Netflix, where you have, you know, it's kind of a deal that David Fincher has spoken about before, where he's like, you know, not to demonetize ourselves, but he referred to, I think, making movies as a rat F business,
right.
like several years ago, and that Netflix was kind of like the best partner to have. And Netflix have, you know, they have encouraged Fincher to do some really, really great stuff. The Killer, I absolutely adored, even though I kind of went into it thinking it was going to be this generic kind of Netflix gun movie. He got to do Mank, which I know wasn't to everyone's taste, but the fact he even got to make that film is impressive in and of itself. Mindhunter was obviously great until Netflix stepped in and tried to creatively influence it, and Fincher was kind of like, well, I've got other stuff that I would like to do instead. So we're kind of in this really awkward situation where it's like, oh, you know, you kind of got to make a deal with the devil to make these really interesting projects. Not all the time, because obviously we are still seeing great stuff at the big traditional Hollywood studios. But at the same time, it's like, oh, we're we're collaborating with these enterprises whose ultimate end kind of goal is to actually have cinemas not be a thing. You know, it's very transparent that the ultimate end game with this is that, as much as, you know, Ted Sarandos in that interview does say that, like, he kind of enjoys the theatrical experience, Netflix would be overjoyed if all the theatrical chains and the traditional 45-day window, if all of that went away.
Big time.
And that is depressing, because I feel like with something like Frankenstein, with a filmmaker like Guillermo Del Toro, who's been such a fixture of the horror genre for the past, like, 30-odd years, you know, seeing that and experiencing that on the big screen is going to leave more of an impact than having it in your home. There is, when you watch a movie in a cinema, there is a completely different context. You know, you are at risk of intrusion from people's bad behavior, but when people agree to that kind of unspoken contract of like, we are in this shared space together, we are experiencing something for the first time in this kind of space that is devoted to giving you the best experience possible, that is transformative. And it's like the same, like, you know, I've been going to see a lot of rep screenings over the last like 5 years, watching films that I've grown up with on, like, watching on TV or on DVD, Blu-ray, 4K, whatever, and then getting to see them on the big screen, like a classic 35mm print or whatever, with fellow enthusiasts. That cannot be beaten, and it is transformative. You will digest something in a completely different way as opposed to it being on streaming. Like, Nosferatu would not have been the cultural hit that it was if it was just shunted straight to Amazon Prime.
Yeah, you mentioned the idea of sort of content slop earlier, and I don't think everything that gets put on Netflix is content slop, and I don't think that's what you're implying. You know, Frankenstein obviously isn't designed to be that, but the structure of the streaming service itself facilitates that idea that it is something that you'll put on now and then you kind of won't really think about, or as we know, they're talking about, you know, movies and television shows that are on Netflix to be just kind of attention grabbing enough, but to be like almost a second screen experience. So it's, the content slop is by design, and a lot of filmmakers, your Guillermo Del Toro's, your David Fincher's, like you mentioned, do punch through that. But like you said, the ultimate end goal is to kind of maybe get away from it, and it's kind of paradoxical because you have this situation where the big movie studios that are committed to theatrical releases, like your Warner Brothers and whatnot, after a bit of a turnaround during the pandemic, like they are only producing big IPs, you know, established IPs.
David Zaslav's been very on record about that. Like the whole future of this is that we're moving towards stuff that has a built-in audience. It's why you're getting another Mortal Kombat movie, even though the last one tanked at the box office and didn't really make a punch through on HBO either. So yeah, you're totally right. It's this twisted kind of irony where Netflix is like, you know, Netflix has a gun pointed straight at cinemas, and it's like, what? Why would? And then it's like, okay, well, I'll give you money to make it.
Yeah,
you know,
it's like, listen, I'm gonna shoot you in the head, but we can go to a theme park before I do it, and we'll give you a nice time, and then bang.
Oh man, it's just so frustrating, because again, I think there is probably a chance that we will get to experience Frankenstein in cinemas if it has that limited theatrical window, but it is so frustrating that for kind of a long-term petty anti-film reason, Netflix will not put this in a wide theatrical window, which it's just kind of sad. It makes me sad.
Battle of the formats in a way, you know, you've got like all of this content debuting at home, but at the same time, there is a hunger again for the bigger formats. I know Christopher Nolan is a very exceptional case, but he releases the 70mm screenings for The Odyssey a year in advance, and people snap them up. People want to get that film in that format, no matter the price, no matter where they have to kind of like go to. And again, it's hard to cultivate that audience that is so dedicated, but it requires that commitment to get there in the first place. And something like this, if it was designed in that way, like you're getting so many films coming out soon that are going to be shot entirely in IMAX, it has that allure, and it doesn't, one, look like content slop that you're not really missing out on if you watch it at home, but two, it has that communal experience of, wait, you're going to go see that movie.
Yeah, exactly. And again, it kind of falls into wider trends of people moving into physical media, people, you know, trying to renegotiate their digital existence, you know, with the people getting into film photography, for instance, as like a hobby thing, you know, people moving into like Blu-rays, 4Ks, people, you know, the resurgence of vinyl has been going on for ages. People are becoming more aware of the context of how you experience something. And I do wonder, really, if there is a long-term trend here, specifically regarding like kind of like younger generations, that Netflix overall, because we hear so much about like, oh, you know, the tablet generation, the screen generation or whatever. I do wonder if these companies, these tech companies, are underestimating how invested people are in the medium and how, you know, social media can be an avenue to actually educate people on like different formats and how the experience of going to a cinema. Christopher Nolan, you're right, is able to punch through because he has that superhero kind of Batman, you know, kind of like through line. But people went to go see Oppenheimer on the big screen and were immediately aware that watching it on the big screen gave it more impact. You know, the whole Alamo test sequence, like the Los Alamos test sequence, that landed in the way it did because people saw it on the biggest screen possible. So I do wonder, I do have hope that going forward, maybe, even though the vast majority of consumers who love content will probably be content themselves to have this on their small screen and, you know, do the ironing and pause it and maybe text their friends and go, oh, doesn't Jacob Elordi look pretty cute as the monster?
He does.
Haha, still would. You know, it would be... I do wonder if maybe there is a growing contingent of people who are more hyper invested in these art forms and are more and more, and I feel like the growing discontent, the overall consensus online from people being like, why isn't Netflix going to put this in the cinema? Maybe the times they are changing, I don't know.